Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Glad that you could join us this evening for our segment in which we'll be having a conversation with Mr. Shlomi Raz. He's CEO and founder and chairman of Eleusis Therapeutics and Health Solutions. He's joining us to talk about Eleusis Therapeutics and a care delivery platform called Eleusis Health Solutions. Thanks for joining us, Shlomi.
Thank you for having me.
Well, give us a little bit about a little bit of your background and what led you to create Eleusis.
Well, in 2008, I decided to leave Goldman Sachs and a life spent mostly on a trading floor to pursue a lifelong interest in psychology. I enrolled at a graduate program at NYU with the intention of becoming a psychotherapist and getting an advanced degree in psychology. It was there that I came across research coming out of Johns Hopkins on the profound psychiatric potential of a highly stigmatized class of drugs known as psychedelics. My curiosity led me to research basic science surrounding psychedelics and their interactions with the serotonin 2A receptor, which is the target of psychedelic drugs. And in my research, I found that not only was there a profound potential to develop psychedelics within the context of psychiatry, but that was only the visible part of the iceberg. And beneath the surface, there was an even more massive potential to develop psychedelics as anti-inflammatory medicines. And so, spurred on by those findings, in 2013, I founded the company.
What type of psychedelic drugs are we talking about specifically?
Yeah, so there are a lot of psychedelics that people know about, compounds like LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, and some of those compounds have varying degrees of anti-inflammatory properties. However, we are developing new compounds that are biased towards very strong anti-inflammatory effect without as much of the psychoactivity that some of these classic psychedelics are known for. We think that psilocybin and other compounds are great for psychiatry, but if you're going to treat inflammation in ophthalmology or in asthma, then it's much better to have a drug that has very little psychoactivity and has a really powerful anti-inflammatory effect. So it's a combination of developing these existing compounds within psychiatry and really developing a whole new class of psychedelics that really are not so psychedelic for the treatment of inflammation.
Well, let's talk about some of the challenges that are obviously associated with such research. I mean, one person's little effect psychedelically might be another person's profound effect psychedelically based on the compound and or the type of inflammation and maybe their psychiatric makeup.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so when we're developing these compounds for inflammation, we're developing compounds that really, it doesn't really matter the varying degree of sensitivity between individual. The safety margins would be something like 10 to 100 times, meaning that you would have to take something like 10 to 100 times the recommended dose to have even the beginning of a psychoactive effect. However, in the context of psychiatry, I think you're absolutely right. Those differences need to be understood for psychedelics to eventually fall into the mainstream of psychiatry, and we're attempting to address those challenges as well.
How do you think that those challenges can be effectively addressed?
Well, so we believe that to make psychedelics a part of psychiatry, to really transform psychiatry with psychoactive drug therapy, we need to do three things. We need to make it safe, effective, and cost-efficient. Now, from a safety perspective, one of the key aspects of safety is making a prediction as to whether or not someone has the risk of psychosis from one of these drugs. Now, some people are predisposed towards having a risk of psychosis, people with first or second degree relatives with schizophrenia and other individuals. And there are ways of taking samples of someone's speech and the pitch of their voice and using advanced machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to predict their risk to having that type of response to these drugs. It's remarkable technology that's already been proven. And from an efficacy perspective, we can use the same type of technologies to identify which patients are more likely to respond to the treatment. And so with a combination of those two, we believe that we can make these therapies not only safe and effective, but also cost efficient and therefore capable of being reimbursed by both private and public payers.
Now, having lived through the legalization in many different phases around many parts of the country of marijuana and different CBD products, there is still some hesitation when it comes to psychedelics, obviously. What do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to psychedelics that can be dispelled in order to further advance this research and possibly gain the, take advantage of the benefits?
Well, I think that most importantly, there needs to be a rigorous scientific approach to the demonstration of safety and efficacy. For both the individual and the society, we need to keep this in the context of clinical use. We, at Eleusis, we don't believe that these compounds have a recreational profile that is safe, but from a clinical perspective, using them in the context of facilities that are designed specifically to provide support for patients, we think is something that not only can be demonstrated empirically, but something that the FDA will ultimately approve. And so we think that using the traditional model of drug development, just like every other drug, is the pathway forward, along the lines of what GW Pharma did to develop CBD for the treatment of childhood epilepsy.
Now, how has this field of psychedelic research in any capacity evolved since you first began? And where do you see Eleusis and the industry as a whole in about 5 years or so?
Well, so we started in 2013 as the first for-profit company developing these compounds. And it was funny, at that time, when I mentioned that I was working on LSD, people kind of took a step back. And on my last day at Goldman Sachs, if you would have told me that I would have either been overseeing a clinical trial giving very low doses of LSD to healthy older adults as a phase 1 safety study to potentially prevent Alzheimer's disease, or abducted by aliens, I would have chosen abducted by aliens, because I never would have thought I would have been in that position. So certainly that was kind of then. Now, if I tell people I'm working on LSD and I used to work at Goldman Sachs, they actually are more worried that I worked at Goldman than I'm working on LSD. So times have definitely changed. I would say that, the biggest difference is now a lot of companies and entrepreneurs that kind of were involved in the cannabis industry see parallels to the potential with psychedelics. And so there's been very recently a very kind of robust proliferation of new companies and approaches. I would say the big difference, though, is that unlike cannabis, this is very much about life science and biotechnology. And therefore, you have to do things in a way it's highly rigorous, that's grounded in science, and that fundamentally puts the patient's safety first. And I think that my hope is that our efforts will lead the way towards access to these important therapies to the public more broadly.
Shlomi, give us a website where we can learn more about your company.
Sure. It's Eleusis, spelled ELEUSIS, LTD.com, EleusisLTD.com, or you could just type in Eleusis and my name, Shlomi Raz, and I'm sure that will be the first thing that pops up.
Thank you so much for joining us on the program this evening.
Great. Thank you for your time.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Mr. Shlomi Raz, CEO, founder, and chairman of Eleusis. And he's been talking with us about a traditional drug development arm called Eleusis Therapeutics and a care delivery platform called Eleusis Health Solutions. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download it, SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/healthprofessionalradio.